Erik Selvig from both the first Thor movie and the first Avengers movie, but it wasn't really until the first Avengers movie that Erik Selvig actually met Loki in person, but he knew that Loki was behind the events of the first Thor movie. Bor is actually meant to be one of the super big deep cuts. Bor is Odin's father inside the MCU. We saw him in the flashbacks during Thor the Dark World. So what he's saying is that Bor was still around when Loki was adopted by Odin and was just yelling at him on the regular because Loki was causing mischief as a child too. This actually changes some pre-existing canon that I believed. So in the first Thor movie, when they show the flashbacks of him adopting Loki, like finding Loki on Jotunheim, it seemed like Bor had already died by that point, and Odin had become king of Asgard because his father had died. But because Loki is saying that he met Bor, and Bor didn't like him or thought that he was a big problem child, it means that he didn't die at that point. There are actually a couple other members of Loki and Thor's family that they tried to do a couple times over the years and didn't. The other big one is Balder the Brave. During the season 2 episodes, Loki and Mobius go to the alternate timeline version of Earth to get Victor Timely King. When they go to the 1893 World's Fair, one of the exhibits is for Asgardian mythology because the people of Earth still know about Odin and Thor, but in this timeline, they don't know about Loki or they don't care about Loki. They mostly use this for comedy to piss Loki off, like, how dare they forget about me? I'm way more important than Balder the Brave. Nobody knows about that guy. Nobody cares about him, which is a bit of a meta reference because they were going to do him during the first Thor movie back in 2011. But at the time, because this was early Marvel Phase 1, Marvel was terrified of how these movies would do with the general audience, like casual audiences, and Kevin Feige felt like introducing a third brother to the mix would have overcomplicated the Loki and Thor story, just overshadowing a lot of stuff. They tried to do him again when they got to Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. He was going to be played by Daniel Craig of all people, like super big cameo scene, like, oh my god, it's Daniel Craig. This is what he would have looked like. They'd signed the contract with him. He was getting ready to film the scenes. But because they filmed the movie during the pandemic, Daniel Craig apparently was really afraid of the pandemic and didn't want to travel, was fear of catching it. So at the very last minute, they wound up contracting with John Krasinski to do his Reed Richards Fantastic Four cameo scene, replacing his Balder the Brave scene. Just because they did film that during the pandemic, there were a bunch of cameos that they tried to do, but then changed at the last minute because they weren't able to get actors because travel was so hard during that period. For instance, one of the other cameos they were going to do was a version of Doctor Doom, but the reason why they didn't do that was a little bit different because they wanted to save the character for something bigger later on. It was actually long before they'd fired Jonathan Majors and wanted to bring Robert Downey Jr. back as his version of Doctor Doom for Avengers 5 and Avengers 6.